Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes so we can let people filter on in here. All right. I think we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to Technology Tuesdays, your laptop tour. My name is Lydia Nimke, and I'm really excited to bring you today's presentation. With us today, we also have Beth Gabriel.
Hi everybody, I'm hanging out in the background. Don't be shy about using that question box. If you have any questions, I'll read them out loud to Lydia as she pauses throughout, and feel free to use the chat to say hi if you like to.
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. So just a little bit of housekeeping. You all are going to notice that you are muted and have your cameras turned off by default, but feel absolutely free to engage in that chat box. And like Beth mentioned, feel free to ask questions through the questions box. Also, I will be sending out a recording of today's presentation and a document chock full of notes. So there's no need to worry about, getting everything from the slides down or everything I might say. You'll have access to everything from today within the next 48 hours. I usually send them out Thursday afternoon. So let's go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to try and take as holistic a view on laptops as possible. There are, of course, so many different models and brands, which will all vary greatly from one to another. So I'm going to speak in a lot of generalities. You'll probably hear me say in general like a dozen times throughout today. But of course, where something is and certain buttons or ports will depend entirely on your personal device. So if you have questions about your own device or something you think is more specific, depending on the details you give me, especially towards the end, I may or may not be able to give you a broad answer, a very specific answer. It all kind of depends. But feel free to ask, and I will, even follow up with you if I need to. So let's talk about the main concepts we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about what a laptop is, especially in contradiction to a desktop computer. We're also going to talk about the buttons and ports, of course, like my favorite part, on laptops. We're going to talk a little bit about using your laptop, and then we're going to talk about best practices. So what is a laptop? A laptop is a small personal computer that is designed for portability. In general, laptops have all the same parts to make up the whole that we described in the Your PC Tour Tech Tuesdays a couple of weeks back. Things like the motherboard, the CPU, that's central processing unit, the CPU fan, RAM, that's random access memory, hard drive, and so on. All those things are still there. They're just much smaller, right? So the drawback with the reduced size is that the smaller components are generally not capable of performing as fast as larger components that you might find in a desktop computer. So for example, if you're running like 8 applications on your laptop, it may very well be putting so much stress on that CPU that it overheats and it forces itself to shut down. While on a desktop, the much larger CPU and the much larger CPU fan will probably be able to better keep up with that added stress and respond a little bit better, a little bit more efficiently. So, as the name might suggest, a desktop sits on a desk top, and a laptop can sit on your lap. Although for safety reasons, it probably shouldn't sit there for long. But generally, you can tell the difference from the name. Your laptop folds flat for easy transportation, right? Whereas a desktop is not meant to be moved on a regular basis. Your laptop can move anywhere you do, generally, with little concern or worry. There's going to be a very simple setup process for your laptop versus your desktop. Everything you need to get started with your laptop generally comes in the box you purchased it in. Your keyboard, your mouse, absolutely. Um, and there's no, finding the correct port to plug your keyboard into or your mouse into, your monitors. There's none of that. It's all concise and it all comes already together for you. Of course, there's going to be a pretty noticeably different size in screen. So your laptop screen size is going to be much smaller than your desktop's monitor. And then a big difference will come in the mouse versus the trackpad. So your computer mouse, I have an example photo of that for you here, versus the trackpad that you'll find on laptops. So switching between these two is generally where I see the people I help in the library having like the greatest difficulty in adapting from using a desktop computer to using a laptop computer. It does take a different sort of touch to get used to a trackpad instead of a mouse, but we'll talk about that a little bit more on some upcoming slides. So most laptops are plenty powerful enough for everyday business, home, and school use. However, if a user does, graphical work like video editing, any 3D, animation, things like that, a more advanced and powerful laptop is needed. And as advanced as laptops are and can be, the top end ones generally still can't compete with the high powered desktops and workstations when you need that raw processing power. What sort of work you do will dictate the laptop type you need, plain and simple. And by work, I mean anything you do on the computer, not necessarily, professional work. So since there are so many options, it's nice to know what laptops with different specifications can do so that you can choose the right one for the type of work you do and the budget you have. So there are different categories, I guess, for different uses. Value laptops generally are going to have lower price tags with lower performing hardware, less storage, and less memory for people that only do basic computing, like a few hours of internet browsing, playing a movie, or writing some papers. So when I was in high school, a value laptop was perfect for me because literally all I would do was go on social media, watch YouTube, and write an occasional paper. That was just perfect for me. That's all I needed for that purpose. Moving on to everyday laptops, they have a slightly higher performance with a little bit more storage and memory for people that use computers more than a value user would. So if you're using it every single day, that's a good indicator that you might need a little bit more than a value laptop. Um, this might be a person who uses the laptop still for work or school, but doesn't need a lot of processing power. So if you are doing, your Excel documents, writing documents for work, those sort of things on a daily basis, and you need the additional storage or the additional computing power to do those things, an everyday laptop is a great option. Now, gaming laptops are a little bit different because they have a mid to high-end mobile 3D graphics card and corresponding processors designed to play those really beautiful and detailed, very graphically intense games while being able to do all the other, background tasks that any normal computer would do. So those are specific, and once we get down to these last three, you'll generally know that they are a gaming laptop or a professional laptop, because it'll be somewhere in the title of the brand in general. But value laptops and everyday laptops, they don't tend to say value Dell laptop. They'll just say a Dell laptop or something like that. So moving on to professional laptops, these are pretty targeted, and they do have higher quality graphics card, but they're designed for user or for studio use cases. So for graphics creation as opposed to rendering as much. Um, they're great at analyzing large amounts of data and other very intensive use cases. They're going to have more high-end processors, more memory, and more storage to handle those demanding workloads. These are generally going to be your most expensive laptops in general. Some gaming laptops can get up there as well, because these professional laptops get as close to the functions of a desktop computer as possible for a laptop. So anytime you're getting close to those more high-end desktop type functions, it's going to be more expensive. So if you need to use any specialized design software, Adobe Creative Suite, you're doing a lot of video editing, anything like that, anything that takes up a lot of storage and you want those to be stored on your hard drive, a professional laptop is going to be a good bet. And then finally, we have ultra portables and notebooks. They are even smaller than your average laptop, and they generally sacrifice certain capabilities and peripheral ports and performance for their size and price. So these are great for similar uses to your value and your everyday laptop, but the differentiator here is the need to be especially mobile, or you want something especially light. So for example, if you worked in a news, if you had a long commute and you wanted to use your laptop on public transportation, you might not want the heaviest, most hardcore processor to be lugging around with you if you just need to work on some documents while you're on your way to work. So this is a good, really visual example I can give you of a professional grade laptop versus an ultra portable. The MacBook Pro in the right picture, this one here, has more ports, as you can see. It has a much bigger frame and a bigger monitor. And if you held it in your hand, you would be able to tell that it's also substantially heavier than this MacBook Air, which has a much smaller frame, one USB port, and one headphone port that I can see, much smaller screen as well. So the Pro definitely has a superior graphics card for video processing and rendering, and the Air probably barely weighs more than, a standard issue of Vogue or a magazine of a similar size. They are both gonna be a little bit more expensive than value or everyday laptops, significantly more expensive, I should say, but for different reasons, because they're both for different intended purposes, right? And of course, MacBook is an expensive computer brand on its own right. So by any other name, depending on the type of brand your laptop is, you might see it referred to as a variety of names, but they are all at their core laptops. Brands have different names for their different models. They might change it depending on the year they released it, but try not to let that confuse you too much. Whether your laptop is called a notebook, a MacBook, a Chromebook, a two-in-one, they are all laptops. All right, so we'll move on to buttons and ports, which is, I like to talk about buttons and ports. These are how you make connections to and from your laptop. So we'll start off with the most powerful button, the power button. Like you see in the image here, it'll generally be lit up when it's powered on, and it'll generally be absolutely dark when it's powered off. So you will just push that button to turn your computer on or off. And then another use for this button is to wake your computer. So when your computer is asleep, not off, but just dark screen, you'll see this button breathing. So that is when the power button's light will go from dimmer to brighter in a rhythmic function. Dimmer to brighter, dimmer to brighter. And you can just tap on that button to wake the computer up. You can also use this button to do a hard reset. And we talked a little bit about troubleshooting in our last tour, Tech Tuesdays. But a hard reset is where you force the computer essentially to shut down. If it is frozen, you're trying to do some sort of troubleshooting, you can't make it happen with your laptop, you can force the computer to shut down and restart itself by holding on to that power button for 3 seconds. It might be a little bit more depending on your model of laptop computer, but generally if you hold that button for 3 seconds, it'll do a hard reset on itself and get you back to your starting screen. Now here's where it's important to note that closing the laptop does not power it off. It simply puts the computer to sleep, right? So if you want to shut down or restart your laptop, you're going to have to do this manually, either by accessing the menu and electing to shut down or restart from there. Or if your computer is not responsive, you do that hard reset we talked about by holding the power button down. Now let's move on to talk about the keyboard. So in the keyboard, you have your main keys, and this is generally more or less what a keyboard is going to look like on a laptop. There's going to be, of course, some, distinctions depending on which you have. But I tried to find two general images. So you have your main keys, your letter keys, everything you need for word processing, your directional keys down here, and you may have a number pad. This is getting more to be a premium feature, I'd say. It's getting to be less common on your everyday laptops, for sure. And then you'll also have soft keys or function keys up at the top here. So let's zoom in a little bit. So you'll see in this top row a line of keys that have F1, 2, 3, all the way up to 12. And you'll also see in a different color below them another symbol, right? And this symbol is that key's extra function. So how you'll access this is by searching in the bottom row of your keyboard for a key that says FN, right? Like this key right here. And you'll simultaneously hold that FN and then press on your function key to enable that function. So if I wanted to, let's see, mute my computer quickly, I could hold FN and then press F6, and then that would mute my computer. So those are good things to know about. Function keys don't jump out at you necessarily, but usually the function key is a different color than the rest of the letters and the tab key, for example. So you can kind of correspond it to the symbols of a different color on the function keys and on some of the other keys that may be on your keyboard. And then there are more options. If you need a number pad for the type of work you do on your laptop, you can always get an external one to connect, right? If you want a wider keyboard, or an ergonomic keyboard, it's just not comfortable for you to use that small and narrow one that's on your laptop, you can absolutely get an external entire keyboard to give you that comfortable, familiar keyboard that you're used to. So, ports and drives. Again, super variability from the ultra portable, which is going to have basically, maybe 1 or 2 ports and drives, to your professional grade laptop, which is going to have probably, upwards of 5 to 8 ports and drives. It all depends. But I have a couple of different examples to show you. In general, at the very least, you're going to have at least a USB to connect things like flash drives, phone chargers, a mouse, things like that, and a headphone socket or an audio jack for connecting headphones, earbuds, speakers, things like that. It is, you will probably have an HDMI cord as well, but some of the ultra portables just don't have them. But it's very common to see an HDMI port for connecting things like visual displays as well, especially on more modern laptops. The more you go up in laptop level, as I mentioned, the more ports and drives you may see. So let's zoom back into these pictures. So you might see additional USB ports. So instead of only 1 USB port, you might have 3 or 4. You might see a microphone jack for a speaker in, as opposed to just the audio jack. You may see an Ethernet port, right? Or even a VGA port for connecting a second screen. This is another visual display port. Then you may even find yourself with something cool like an SD card slot. And this is great for importing photos directly from your, digital camera's SD card, your video camera's SD card, your GoPro, things like that, right into your computer. And you might even have a micro SD card slot. So it all depends on what your computer has, what you can connect to it, of course. So depending on the amount of ports you have on your laptop, particularly those USB ports and the HDMI port, you may effectively be able to have your laptop function as a desktop with an external keyboard, monitor, and mouse. So if, say, something happened to your desktop, you were comfortable using your desktop, but you just had to, for some reason, it was only in your budget to be able to get a laptop that was comparable, you can literally connect your monitor, connect your keyboard, connect your mouse, and have it function for you as a desktop if that's something you would be interested in doing. So now let's talk about actually using your laptop. And like I mentioned, there's some differences, but there are only really a few key ones that I'll bring up today. So there are two. Power. Power is a really important thing with laptops that is not necessarily as important with desktops because, your desktop is always connected to power through its power cord. But with a laptop, you need your power cord and you need your battery working in conjunction. Both need to be operational. for the ideal experience, I guess. So you'll plug your power cord into your laptop and into your electrical outlet, and that'll enable your battery to charge. Once your battery is charged, you can leave the power cord behind and kind of move wherever you would like to, if you have a working battery, that is. If you don't have a working battery, you can still use your laptop. It just has to stay connected to the power. And that's kind of a tricky situation to be in because, things can happen where the power cord gets pulled out of your laptop and you are kind of sad about that. But it can still work if you're in a pinch. If you need that to work for you, it can absolutely still work. Um, and of course, if you're working from a battery, you can have some amount of time before you need to recharge. And this varies so greatly that I can't even say. From my personal experience with older laptops, I've gotten, in some cases, like 90 minutes of pure battery power. With my current laptop I have now, I have almost 8 hours. So it really varies, and it depends on what you do. If you're doing, if you're playing an intensive video game, you may only get 2 hours, where if you were just, working on a document, you might get 4. It really all depends. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this mouse versus the trackpad. And like I mentioned, this is generally where I will see people having difficulties if they've never used a laptop before, or they've only used, an older laptop. This is generally where I will see people having difficulties with the transition from a desktop to a laptop. So I'm going to try my best to show you all what I mean, how to perform these sort of different kinds of clicks that you are super used to doing with a traditional mouse like this that you might not be used to doing on the trackpad. I have an example trackpad here for you, and I'm going to actually turn off my screen sharing and hope that you can see me doing this now. All right. I think that will work all right. There we go. Okay, so for your click, got to make sure it's in frame. For your click, you're going to perform a simple left click, like the same general click we do all the time on our mouse, simply by tapping on the touchpad, right? You can tap once, you can tap many times. That's the same thing as a click. Now, most touchpads have at the bottom something that will make an actual clicking sound for you. So if you'd prefer to get that more traditional click feel, you can definitely click down at the bottom. I also want to say that my video is mirrored, so I should be actually, this is my right hand and this is my left hand. I don't know if that makes a difference, but I'm going to say that. So for a right click, so that click we do on the other side of the mouse to kind of enable the secondary menus and things like that. To perform a right click, you're going to tap with 2 fingers on the touchpad. You're just going to do that same tap, but with 2 fingers. You can also tap with 1 finger on the lower right-hand corner. So you just do 1 tap on the lower right-hand corner. Now, dragging and dropping. This is a tricky one, I will admit. To drag something, as if you were, clicking and holding it and dragging the mouse across the screen to drop, say, a file into an email or something like that. You can do a double tap, but keep your finger down, and then move your finger and then release it where you want it to drop. Alternatively, you can click with one finger, grab the item with the other, and move it where you want it to drop. That is a tricky one. I fully understand. And then for scrolling purposes, you can always use your space bar to scroll down one page. You can use your directional keys on the keyboard, so those arrow keys, to scroll up and down as well. You can also use page up and page down, and I can show you those on the keyboard if you don't know where those are. Just let me know in the Q&A. I can absolutely show you. You can use those for scroll, but if you want to scroll with the mouse, because you're used to using a wheel like this to scroll, you will just put two fingers and then drag vertically, or two fingers and drag horizontally. Pretty simple to scroll, actually, I think. So those are kind of the differences between the mouse and the trackpad specifically. It does take some getting used to, but I promise you, with a little bit of practice, even if you wanted to make something that looks like this, and just, practice clicking and dragging and all that good stuff, you could absolutely do that. So let's jump back into the presentation here. All right. Moving on to internet. This is more of a thing with your laptop than it is with your desktop computer, because, right, your desktop computer stays stationary in one location generally. So your laptop can go out into the world and connect to other people's Wi-Fi, open networks, closed networks, all that sort of thing. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. To get to the internet from your laptop out in the world, you're going to connect to a public network. And that is a network that anyone can connect to. The Milwaukee Public Library, for example, has a public network in all of its locations, right? That anyone can connect to. It doesn't matter if you're in the building, out of the building, if you're a patron. You don't need anybody's permission to connect to that network. A private network, on the other hand, is a network which has restricted access. So you're probably going to need to enter a password to join that network. So networks for businesses or schools are example of private network, and your home network, right? Because, hopefully you have to enter a password to connect to your home Wi-Fi. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the distinction, but specifically how they relate to Windows computers, because Mac operating systems are a little different, and they have a lot more proprietary security techniques. But it's going to be pretty similar across the board. So you can change how Windows treats private and public networks, but here is how it works by default. Windows assumes that your private networks, like your home and your work networks, are trusted networks full of other devices that you want to connect to. And it asks you, when you're connecting to that internet for the first time, is this a trusted network? The phrasing might be slightly different, but it'll ask you. And if you select yes, it's okay, this is a trusted network. I know I'm supposed to be here. I want to connect to other devices and give the user the opportunity to do that. So it's up to you to select the right option when you are asked, do you trust this network? So if you're on a private network, your home, your work, your best friend's house that you're at all the time, that's okay. However, when you're on a public network, Windows assumes that public networks are full of other people's devices that you don't want to connect to. So it uses different settings to protect the security of your personal data that's all over your computer, of course, right? And your device itself. So when you don't select, this is a trusted network when you're connecting to the Wi-Fi. So you're in a coffee shop, you're at the library, you just need to get on the internet real quick. Um, don't select that it's a trusted network. It doesn't do anything for you except open you up a little bit to vulnerabilities. I don't know, you know, the malicious intent of these people, but better safe than sorry. So make sure you select appropriately when you're joining Wi-Fi out in the world. Yeah. You also have the option, if you have the appropriate Ethernet port on your laptop, to connect to a wired internet connection. And that's going to be done, with an Ethernet cable, generally at home, because, it's a little odd to ask people in the world if you can connect your Ethernet cable to their router. But, at home, feel free. You can plug that in and you can use the internet that way as well. So, now that we've talked about actually using your computer, we're going to move on to some basic best practices that may seem like common sense if you're a long-term laptop user, but they're nevertheless important to be aware of if you're new to them. Of course, your device, your prerogative. Obviously, nothing I say needs to be taken, as the end all be all word. I am just a person who works at the library and likes to do programs about computers. So feel free to add your own tips and tricks to using laptops to the chat. Contradict me if you want. I'm not like that. Feel free to add anything you think your other people in this program would benefit from, right?
We did have a question in the chat that I think you could answer quick
Yeah.
before moving on. Gail wanted to know, is notebook a generic name for an ultralight laptop, or is that a brand name?
I think it started off as a brand name, like an HP notebook.
Mm-hmm.
And now I feel like it has evolved into, a general name for an ultralight sort of laptop. Because I remember when the HP notebook came out and I thought it was so cool because it was literally the size of like a college ruled notebook that I had for school at the time. So yeah, I think it has evolved to just be a general, Kleenex facial tissue type of distinction.
That sounds about right to me too, because I remember when it came out as well, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
look at how thin it is.
Right? Cool.
Very good. Well, that was the only question so far in the question box. So feel free to keep dropping them in there if anyone does have questions, okay?
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks. So our first don't is to not leave it in a vehicle or unattended in public. We have a lot of car break-ins and car thefts, unfortunately, in Milwaukee, as I'm sure you are all aware of. So leaving it in a vehicle is never a great idea at all, or anything valuable. And leaving laptops unattended in public is also never a great idea. They are ultra portable. They're super easily moved, right? So someone could grab your laptop and be gone in 30 seconds. And there's nothing weird about a person walking around with a laptop. There's something a little weird about a person, breaking your car window or something. But there's nothing weird about a person walking around with a laptop. You're not going to think twice. And, you're probably very unlikely to get it back. So just be careful, be safe, keep an eye on your possessions, especially those of great value to you. Don't put your laptop on the floor or on a chair. Now, floor might make more sense than chair, but the way I look at it, and this has happened to friends of mine in college, if it is a place where people walk, even if it's right in the middle and you think everybody can see it, or a place where people sit, it's more than likely to get stepped on or sat on. And honestly, it may never work again. So just be cautious where you put your laptop. They are pretty fragile beings. don't stack other items on top of it. A lot of times you're, carrying your books and you're carrying your laptop. You may just, leave a textbook or something you're reading on top of your book, but this can actually damage the screen so that you have, you know, a permanent blemish kind of in your screen every time you look at your laptop, which is not a good experience to have if you're trying to watch a movie or something of that effect. Don't press on the display, obviously, unless you have a touchscreen, which is, a new and fun thing. But if you don't have a touchscreen computer, please don't put any pressure on the display, the monitor, the screen, all the same, name for the same thing. Um, Again, pretty fragile, right? Traditional desktop monitor screens are, about 3/4 of an inch thick, right? Whereas your laptop screen is maybe half a centimeter. So it is a lot going on back there and it's very fragile to the touch. So just be cautious of that if you don't have a touchscreen, of course. If you have a touchscreen, go off touching it all the time. And then don't use it directly on your lap for extended periods. I know this is contradictory because obviously laptop should be on your lap, but they actually can get quite hot. And there have been many cases where people have been burnt like pretty severely on their lap from, working really intently on a project on their laptop on their lap, falling asleep with their laptop on their lap. So, if you're going to work with your laptop on your lap, that, I do it, it's fine. But I always try and at least put a cushion, like a pillow, just between my actual legs and the laptop, the bottom of the laptop, just to provide that barrier. I'm not trying to get burned from doing any work. Um, and there are also like a very wide variety of laptop desks, all different shapes and forms, different styles and stuff that you can use for a little portable desk to go along with you in your laptop use. Now, for some do's, do use a carrying case or, your backpack, whatever the case may be. But the key here is something that's specifically designed to hold a laptop that is appropriately sized to yours because, laptops can vary pretty greatly. So a little carrying case for a big professional MacBook's not really helpful, and the reverse of that is true as well. So you want to use an appropriately sized carrying case that, they'll all have a little bit of padding in them to help protect the edges of your device from damage in the case that you take a tumble, you drop it, um, whatever the case may be. So use a carrying case when you can. Do power off regularly. Like we mentioned, shutting that laptop is not turning it off. So I would say, at least once a week, turn your laptop off completely, overnight when you're done using it or whatever, just to give it that chance to do those system updates when it turns back on, update the software that, a lot of software gets automatically updated, but, it doesn't go into effect until your computer shuts down. So you maybe just want to shut it down every so often just to give it the chance to do those things. Do close your laptop before you transport it. I see a lot of people, well, I used to see a lot of people walking around the library holding their laptop just open, just open by the keyboard. And I'm always thinking to myself, I hope nobody accidentally bumps into you or a kid doesn't come racing through because it's much more likely to get significantly damaged if it falls in that open state as opposed to in its, flat state, right? So if you have any cause to move while you're in the middle of something, just close it. Your laptop's only going to go to sleep. Make sure you save your work first, but you can just close your laptop and then hold it in your hand and go where you need to go. But do save your work regularly because, like I mentioned on the power slide, power is kind of differential, right? You might see that you have 30 minutes of good battery left. You're thinking you're gonna, wrap up in the next 15 minutes, but some background processing happens and you end up, running out of power in the next 10. It happens on occasion. So just be sure to save your work regularly so you don't lose any of the good stuff you've done while you've been working on your laptop. And now I'll open it up fully for questions. That's all I have for you. Thank you all so much for joining me today.
So far, no questions in the question box or the chat. That's a good tip about closing the laptops. My kids are always walking around the house with their Chromebooks from school with them open, and I'm like,
My husband actually works for MPS repairing those Chromebooks. So, yeah, please close them.
Oh my goodness. I fear the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old is a little thrashed. But I mean, he's 4. He's doing his best.
No, it's okay. There's tons of turnover in Chromebooks, so I'm sure they'll all be fine.
Oh, here's a question. Gail would like to know, do you want to talk about security such as don't do anything secure like banking on a public network?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. So what Gail is talking about is the fact that, like we mentioned, your computer is discoverable on public networks, right? So what that means is people with ill intentions could effectively discover, utilize, put things into your computer. Now, generally, your computer does a good job of stopping them, but a determined bad guy, let's call him, is gonna get through that, most likely. So doing things like banking, which is like she's talking about, doing things like paying bills with your credit cards, things of that nature, especially financial information, things like renewing your passport or driver's license, things in that sort of realm where you're sharing personal information. I was born on this day. My mom's maiden name is this. On a public network could theoretically be viewed by a bad guy, bad person, right? So we just want to be cautious and cognizant of this risk. I'm not going to say never do it because some people don't have access to private internet, but you want to be cognizant of the fact that it can happen and be aware of what's happening with your bank, right? Be aware of what's happening with your, identity if you regularly do those sorts of things on public networks. Thank you for the question and the reminder, Gail. Thank you.
Let's see. Does letting the laptop sleep use up battery energy? Any tips for keeping the lifespan of the battery for a longer time? And this is from Christina.
Christina, yes, letting a laptop sleep does use up battery energy. It uses a bit less than, just being on as normal, but it does use up a little bit of battery energy. Like if you just close your computer, put it to sleep, and came back to it 2 or 3 days later, it'd probably be dead. So tips for improving battery life, I would say, a big tip would be turning off your computer whenever you're not using it, which is a big ask. Would be a big ask for me. I don't know if it's a big ask for anybody else. But that is probably the biggest tip, making sure that battery is not in use at all when you aren't actively using it is just going to be the easiest thing to prolong your battery life. Otherwise, you can always replace your battery depending on your model. It's it's typically not that expensive. If you have a MacBook, it's probably pretty expensive. But yeah, otherwise, battery replacements are a thing you can pretty easily do. So yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you.
Okay, Maureen would like to know, what does it mean when you see other icons under yours saying connected to the internet? Who are all these other people? Are they picking back off your Wi-Fi? Not quite sure.
I believe, and I could be wrong, so you're saying when you go to click to connect on your Wi-Fi, are you seeing a bunch of other networks, potentially?
You can feel free to drop that. Yes, that's what she meant.
Sure. So those
Thanks, Maureen.
are probably if you live in an urban area, you know, like Milwaukee, like I can see all of my neighbors' Wi-Fi connection. Some of them have funny names, some of them are just like AT&T, a bunch of numbers. There's a couple Linksies left around. So those are all your neighbors' Wi-Fi connections. And generally, they're all going to be private networks as well that you don't have access to, but you're just in range of their router or their modem that's, you know, spitting out that Wi-Fi signal. Good question.
It looks like that's about. Oh, there's one in the chat. Janet would like to know, does doing a hard reset damage the laptop in any way?
Nope, nope. The most damage that'll come from doing a hard reset is the fact that if you are working on anything and you didn't get a chance to save it, depending on what sort of processes are getting gunked up, like the reason you're hard resetting, you might just like lose all your work. Your autosave might not have had time or the processing power to go into effect. So you might just lose whatever you were working on. But it doesn't hurt your laptop. Nope. It's a built-in fail-safe for you to be able to back out when things go awry.
Excellent. Arlene would like to know, can a laptop get any updates while it's asleep? Is it okay to leave it on sleep for many hours when not in use?
It's totally fine. It's totally fine to leave it on and sleep when it's not in use. However, I would say if you can connect it to power while it's asleep, that's always a good bet. It is unlikely to get those operating system updates when it's not in use. So the updates to Windows as a whole, the updates to the Apple OS, whichever one is out there now, because it has to shut down so that the operating system is not in use when it tries to update it, if that makes sense. And same thing for those applications. It generally, you know, you update your application and it says, you know, once you restart your computer, you'll have the fully updated version. So you just kind of, you know, shut down every now and then to compensate for both of those two things. They used to force you to shut down your computer and force you to do restarts whenever you needed an update or did an update, but they've kind of slowed off of that, which is nice for when you're working on something. But if you aren't in the habit of shutting down your computer all the time, I'm really not. I just try to do it every now and then. It can kind of come back to bite you with a somewhat unsecure, somewhat out of date system. So take that for what you will. Thank you for the question.
I think that's. Oh, here comes another one. Are updates done overnight when I fully shut down?
So what you'll find a lot of cases is that they are checked for every time you restart your computer, right? So they're checked for whenever you turn your computer back on. So the shutting down is one part of it, but then the turning it back on is when it checks for your updates. Um, I know for my computer, I'll see, it'll just have a general blue screen before it takes me to the login screen for my computer saying, updating your operating system, something cool and calming with like a load bar. Takes like, I think at most it's taken like 5-10 minutes. And that was when there were pretty significant changes. But in general, it takes like 90 seconds. And then we're back to business as normal.
All
Thank you
right.
for the question.
Yeah, I think that is it.
Okay, awesome. Um, just as final closing words, if you are interested in more programming from the library, I encourage you all to visit npl.org/stay connected and learn more about all of our awesome offerings. Book bundles, curbside delivery, all that cool stuff. We have lots going on that is awesome to do and share with others. And for our next Tech Tuesdays, we'll be talking all about listening and subscribing to podcasts. So I hope some of you will join us for that as well. Thank you all so much for coming and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night.